In the 2018 film Bully, the story revolves around a weak kid who's had enough of being tormented by bullies. He decides to seek revenge by training with a boxing champion. Let's summarize the plot. Jimmy, a young and timid high school student, faces a rough start on his first day at a new school. While at his locker, a trio of bullies deliberately knocks his books to the ground. Bewildered, Jimmy watches them as their leader, Miles, confronts him. Miles taunts Jimmy about his weight and provokes him, but Jimmy remains silent. Miles dismisses him and continues down the corridor, targeting other students. After the bullies leave, Jimmy's best friends, Andy and Bobby, arrive and discuss the bullies' actions. Jimmy goes home, where he finds his mother getting ready for work. Upset, Jimmy decides not to confide in her and heads straight to his room. He video calls his friends, who try to cheer him up. Andy invites him to his house, but Jimmy declines and stays in bed for the day, only getting up to return to school. The following morning, as Jimmy arrives at school, his friends surprise him by choosing to accompany him to the entrance. When they're nearly there, Bobby spots Miles and Neil approaching and decides to make a quick getaway, leaving his friends to confront the bullies who are after money. Miles instructs Andy to leave and attempts to extort $100 from Jimmy to leave him in peace while pressuring him to hand over the money. During this, Miles notices a student named Vinny observing the situation and opts to walk away, suggesting they'll discuss it later. Although he's scared stiff, Jimmy enters the classroom where Neil begins mocking Bobby and even physically harasses him, causing Bobby to cry out and exit the classroom in embarrassment. When the bell for break rings, Jimmy finds Bobby in the hallway, in tears, and does his utmost to lift his friend's spirits by offering to buy lunch in the cafeteria. Andy notices that a girl named Adrian, a fellow economics classmate, has her eye on Jimmy. As the two exchange glances, Miles approaches the group once again, insisting that Jimmy owes him $100. Even though he's scared, Jimmy firmly refuses to pay a dime, which infuriates Miles. Realizing where things are heading, another student decides to step in and asks Miles to leave Jimmy alone, expressing a desire to avoid anyone getting hurt. Thinking this student won't take action either, Miles tells him to be quiet, threatening that he'll be the one to get hurt if he doesn't comply. However, this proves to be a significant misstep, as the atmosphere becomes increasingly tense. The intervening student calls over his cousin, who stands at an imposing 2 meters tall, and warns Miles that he'd better leave while he still can walk, causing the bully to back off out of fear of a potential altercation. After Miles departs, Jimmy inquires if the large student wants to be his security guard. The young man, aware that Jimmy doesn't have any money, departs after enduring yet another humiliating experience. Jimmy begins his walk home, and halfway there, he encounters Miles and Eddie, who have parked their car in front of him. They demand the $100, claiming there's no one to protect him now. Jimmy insists he doesn't owe them anything, but Miles refuses to accept it and knocks him down with a punch. Unsatisfied, Miles starts kicking Jimmy while he's on the ground. Seeing the brutal assault, a concerned neighbor intervenes. Upon spotting the neighbor leaving his house, Miles begins hurling insults and quickly retreats to his car, making a hasty escape. As the elderly neighbor approaches to assist Jimmy, he notices that the young man has a cut on his eyebrow. The neighbor offers to help treat the wound, mentioning his extensive experience with such injuries. Once in his garage, the man introduces himself as Mr. Jackson. Jimmy notices a picture of a fighter on the wall and discovers that his neighbor was once a renowned professional boxer known as Action Jackson. After bandaging Jimmy's wound, the retired boxer, Action Jackson, emphasizes the importance of learning self-defense. Jimmy, however, responds that he'd just be a punching bag. Action counters that he already is, and if Jimmy is genuinely interested in learning how to fight, he can recommend an excellent teacher, but only if his parents approve. Excited by the prospect, Jimmy asks for a ride, and Mr. Jackson takes him home. He recounts the entire incident to Jimmy's parents and discusses the significance of self-defense. He offers to help their son in this regard. Despite thanking Mr. Jackson for his assistance, Jimmy's parents initially decline the offer, believing they can handle the situation themselves. However, the following afternoon, Jimmy's parents arrive at Mr. Jackson's door with their son, who is even more battered than before. They inquire about the self-defense lessons, realizing the urgency of the matter. This turn of events leads to a new chapter in Jimmy's journey toward self-protection. To kick off the lessons, Action Jackson takes Jimmy's family to his friend Manny's boxing gym, where Manny is renowned as one of the greatest boxing trainers in the world. After introducing everyone, Mr. Jackson explains the bullying situation to Manny and schedules Jimmy's first lesson for the next day. The following afternoon, Action takes Jimmy to the gym, and Manny commences his first lesson. Manny talks about Jimmy's strength advantage due to his weight, which means they can skip weight training and dive straight into the practical aspects of boxing. Manny covers the basics of boxing, including the jab and proper foot positioning. After a full afternoon of training, Jimmy asks for a ride home. During the ride, Jimmy confides in Action about his concerns regarding Miles. He's aware that if he gives Miles the $100, he'll keep coming back for more money. Mr. Jackson advises Jimmy that he needs at least a month to learn how to defend himself. He suggests that Jimmy should find a way to buy himself that time. Action proposes that Jimmy might try a deceptive approach with Miles. He suggests that Jimmy could lie to Miles, telling him that he'll give him $200 at the end of the month if Miles promises to leave him alone during that period. Jimmy is skeptical about this plan, unsure if it will work. The next morning, Jimmy pretends to be sick to skip school, but his mother sees through it and insists he goes. At school, while getting his things from his locker, Miles approaches him about the $100. Recalling Action's advice, Jimmy says he has a new job and will pay $200 at the end of the month to be left alone. Miles agrees, and Jimmy finally finds some peace at school. After school, Jimmy returns to the gym for his lessons, but he begins to feel unmotivated and doesn't put in his best effort. Recognizing this, Manny directs him to practice on the punching bag and goes to speak with Action. Manny shares his concerns, stating that if Jimmy doesn't want to learn boxing, there's no point in wasting time trying to teach him. Following the conversation, Jackson takes Jimmy home and inquires about what's troubling him. Jimmy admits he fears training for a month without improvement. Action motivates him by stressing that quitting means he'll always be a target for bullies. He reminds Jimmy that by persevering, he can end the situation and teach his future son how to avoid such struggles. The next morning, Jimmy attends school, where Miles and his group assault Bobby and hurl insults. Afterward, Miles confronts Jimmy and asks if their deal is still on. He threatens that if Jimmy doesn't pay the $200, he'll make Jimmy and his friends regret ever being born. Jimmy faces a difficult choice, torn between fear and the hope of empowerment. After the three friends depart, Jimmy discovers Bobby sitting on the stairs, deeply upset. He attempts to comfort him, but Bobby expresses his frustration, insisting that neither the teachers nor anyone else can intervene to stop the ongoing situation. All they can do is wait for Miles to lose interest in tormenting them. Fueled by determination, Jimmy decides to take matters into his own hands. Jimmy leaves school and hops onto his bicycle, pedaling all the way to the local gym. His unexpected action surprises many, but he's resolute. After an exhausting journey, he finally arrives at the gym and dedicates himself wholeheartedly to boxing training. He pushes his limits, even knocking out Manny, all in the name of defending his friends. The following days, Jimmy dedicates himself to boxing and losing weight. A week later, in the restroom with Andy, Miles arrives to collect the money. Jimmy realizes he's not ready for a confrontation and quickly informs Miles that his boss delayed payment until next week. Miles reluctantly agrees to wait, and they peacefully enjoy lunch. Back in the cafeteria, Jimmy decides it's time to come clean with Andy. He admits that he doesn't have the money to pay Miles and reveals that he's spent the past few weeks engrossed in boxing training, all with the aim of being able to protect himself. Upon this revelation, Andy confesses she believed Jimmy was trying to lose weight to ask Adrian out. Jimmy blushes and admits he'd like to, but Adrian overhears and joins them. She teases Jimmy, saying he needs to ask her out first, and surprises him by inviting him to her friend's Friday party. Excited, Jimmy heads home to change and eagerly waits for Adrian to pick him up at the agreed-upon time. When Adrian arrives, he's pleasantly surprised to see that the girl's mother is with her, and she offers to drive them to the party. At the party, they mingle with other students for a while, but eventually, the two decide to step outside for some privacy and get to know each other better. During their conversation, Adrian compliments Jimmy on his noticeable weight loss and asks what his secret is. As they talk, Eddie, one of Miles's friends, unexpectedly shows up and starts hurling insults at them. In light of the agreement with Miles, Jimmy decides to confront Eddie. The situation escalates, but eventually, Eddie backs down and leaves them alone after Jimmy agrees to pay what he owes. Once the dust settles, the two of them enjoy the rest of the party. It's not long before Adrian's mother arrives to pick them up and take Jimmy home. Before they part ways, Jimmy musters up the courage to ask Adrian to come to his house the next day so he can share his weight loss secrets with her. The next morning, Jimmy calls Action and asks him to pick him up, mentioning that he's bringing someone to watch his training session. At the appointed time, Mr. Jackson arrives to collect the couple and drives them to the gym. Once inside, Jimmy reveals that his weight loss is a result of self-defense training. Inside the gym, Action introduces Adrian to Manny and asks if she's interested in trying boxing, as she's never fought before. Adrian, surprised, inquires about whether girls also train in boxing. Manny decides to show her by arranging a demonstration with a female fighter. Manny calls over his pupil, Rosie, and suggests a round against one of the male fighters in the ring. Rosie steps up and showcases her impressive skills, managing to knock out her male opponent with just a single punch. Adrian is left in awe, realizing the world of fighting is not limited by gender. After Rosie's demonstration, it's Jimmy's turn to practice and demonstrate all the skills he's acquired during his intense month of training. The following morning, Jimmy wakes up to a message from Adrian. Without letting his rest day deter him, he heads straight to the gym. Manny, noticing his dedication, informs him about a special training session planned for the day. Jimmy's training partner is going to change, so Manny instructs him to prepare by bandaging up. All set, Manny helps Jimmy with his gloves and introduces him to Tequila, an MMA fighter who's going to demonstrate the art of street fighting in the ring. Tequila shares insights on using elbows and knees in a fight, and they spend the entire day training. The next morning, Jimmy rises early and heads to school. During a break, he joins Andy for a walk, but they run into Miles and Neil, who are sitting with another girl. The bullies immediately approach and question Jimmy's actions during the party, insisting he hands over money by the day's end to avoid trouble. Overhearing this, Adrian becomes curious and asks Jimmy for an explanation, to which Jimmy replies that he'll clarify things later. After their conversation, Jimmy heads to the bathroom, where Vinny approaches him at the urinal, inquiring about his upcoming confrontation with Miles after class. Jimmy explains that Miles is attempting to extort money from him, and he's determined to resolve the issue. Intrigued, Vinny questions Jimmy about the training with Manny and inquires about how he got this information. Jimmy, however, simply states that it's his responsibility to stay informed and wishes Vinny good luck in the upcoming fight before making his exit. Inside one of the bathroom stalls, Eddie eavesdrops on the entire conversation and promptly sends a message to Miles, informing him that Jimmy is training with Manny and asserting that he won't pay the demanded money. Confused, Miles asks Eddie who Manny is, to which Eddie clarifies that Manny is the owner of a boxing gym and speculates that Jimmy might be planning to seek revenge. Miles decides to take a drastic step and asks Eddie to contact a rather unhinged criminal named Billy. Eddie complies, making the call and offering Billy $200 to teach Jimmy a lesson. Hearing this conversation from the next stall, another student in the restroom rushes over to Vinny to share the news. In the lockers, Adrian talks to Jimmy about the situation between him and Miles. Jimmy is being extorted and has started boxing training to deal with it. He only told Andy about the training, but somehow Vinny found out. Adrian mentions that Vinny is the school's biggest gossip, so Miles probably knows about the training sessions by now. Jimmy assures Adrian he can handle the situation, but Adrian is genuinely worried. He calls Manny, gives him all the details, and hopes for help. Manny says he can't interfere in students' issues and advises Jimmy to be with his friends in tough times. He ends the call quickly. Simultaneously, Vinny contacts an acquaintance, explaining that there's an event at their school and he'll need help getting out when the time comes. When all the students gather outside, Jimmy confronts Miles, firmly stating that he won't give him a single penny. Miles responds by revealing that he's aware of Jimmy's training and has a surprise in store. He explains that he has transferred the $200 debt to an acquaintance who will arrive to collect the money. Unbeknownst to him, Billy is en route to the school when he is apprehended by Vinny's friends. Upon receiving confirmation of Billy's capture, Vinny informs Miles that Billy won't be showing up. With no other choice, the bully decides to confront Jimmy. Confident, Miles approaches Jimmy and lands a punch that knocks his opponent down. Jimmy, however, refuses to give up and manages to recover. He evades Miles's attacks and counters with a jab that nearly sends Miles to the ground. Frustrated, Miles attempts to go on the offensive but ends up being knocked down by a second punch. Realizing that he's in danger of getting beaten, Miles reevaluates the situation. Neil steps into the fray, attempting to restrain Jimmy, allowing Miles to square off against him. However, Andy intervenes, preventing Neil from aiding Miles, which grants Bobby the chance to land a knockout punch on Neil during their one-on-one tussle. Miles finds himself overmatched by Jimmy, taking a blow that sends him crashing to the ground, his nose bleeding. With determination, Jimmy advances on his adversary, administering a crucial strike that leaves Miles sprawled unconscious after taking a knee to the midsection. Once the dust settles, the crowd gathers around Jimmy, celebrating the long-awaited end of the Bullies' reign. As if the public humiliation wasn't enough, the entire skirmish gets recorded, and the footage goes viral, catapulting Jimmy to newfound fame as he stands up against bullying. His heroic act even lands him on TV as part of an anti-bullying campaign. Following these tumultuous events, Jimmy becomes a revered figure at school, finally able to enjoy high school life in harmony with Adrian and their friends.